Hello, I'm Torben, and I'm here with Paul today. Today we're here to talk about car allowance in all its many shapes and forms. We're here to discuss, first of all, taxable car allowances, why they're bad, why you should avoid them, and how you should avoid them. We're also here to talk about what the alternatives are to taxable car allowance. There are a variety of different programs sanctioned by the IRS that in the United States you can use to reimburse your employees who drive for work. We'll discuss that, and we'll also discuss some of the software solutions that allow people to run these programs efficiently and effectively. So welcome, Paul. Thanks for being here today. Would you mind introducing yourself?
For sure. Thanks, Torben, for having me on. My name is Paul. I'm part of the Cardata team here. I'd say, as Torben mentioned, we're going to chat a little bit about allowance programs, kind of how they're dated, some other programs that are out there, and just ways to navigate that if you go forward with the change and what that looks like.
100%. So let's dive right in. And one thing that we see often is car allowances that are treated like income. Mm-hmm. Car allowances paid to employees who drive their personal vehicles for work, but these car allowances are treated as income in the same way as everything else on the paycheck. So could you dive into that a little bit? Could you tell me why allowances are seen as income, in what ways they're seen as income, and start to sort of describe why this is not a good thing?
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a really good point. So the way that allowances work is it's going to come out as put like on the paycheck, it might be another line. Here's your allowance for the month for vehicles. And with that, it's going to be taxed under the same taxation as the income due to this. And so as we'll get into later, the IRS has created programs to avoid this, but there's tracking and other such things. So that's really what happens is it comes through there, and the IRS doesn't like the transparency for a lot of these companies. And so they say, what's this extra, $600? It's going to be taxed the same as the other ones. So that's really the basis of where it starts. And then there's some other extra tax, which I think we'll get into shortly.
Yeah, sure. So it sounds like what you're saying is you have these drivers, and they're driving on behalf of your business. Mm-hmm. They're using their personal cars, and you're giving them something like $600 a month. Mm-hmm. $600 a month to drive their personal car on behalf of your business, etc. And what's happening when you don't implement any measures for tracking or for accounting for these car allowances is that those allowances are treated in the same way as every other bit of income. The IRS doesn't particularly like to see a deductible item paid out with no accountability. So people end up losing money on these car allowances. Isn't that the case? And they can lose quite a bit. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, for sure. So we like to say here at Cardata, 30 to 38% is kind of what we're looking at. And so if we break it down, we're looking at, let's say, somebody who's on the road, an average sales driver making around 50,000 plus. So their tax bracket is going to be like 22%, right? And so as we just mentioned, that base income is going to be taxed at 22%. Now on top of that, you have FICA, which is another tax that comes off of bonuses and reimbursements of that nature. And so this is at 7.65%. And so this tax comes off to help things like general welfare, health stations and things like that. So that 7.65%, when you add that on top of the 22, you're looking close to 30% at that point, which is a good chunk of money. If we're going to go back to our $600 example, it's going to be like $420 is what the drivers are taking home. And so that's going to be irritating for the drivers because they're like, well, where's all my reimbursement money? And it's going to be irritating for the employer because the drivers are going to be irritated, most likely, right? So
I think I get it. So what you're saying is that there's, because it's treated as income, mm-hmm. because we're not doing any accounting practices for these flat rate car allowances of, for example, $600, there's a bunch of tax coming off. Mm-hmm. There's tax coming off at the income tax rate of the relevant employee, and there is tax coming off from payroll taxes as well. Mm-hmm. And that's, 7.65% on the employee side and on the employer side as well. And that's how we get up to a number similar to 38%, which is you're losing even more than $200 there on that car allowance, or like you said, you're only taking home about $420 just with the employee side taxes, the income and the employee side FICA taxes. So that's quite a bit of money to lose off what should essentially be a tax deductible business expense borne by the employee. So, so what I'm wondering is, it sounds like there's some obvious tax waste issues. That's an expense that is borne and doesn't need to be borne by the company and its employees. But not only are these taxable allowances quite wasteful, as we've discussed, but moreover, they're also unfair to drivers. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, no, it's true. And today, kind of in today's day and age, HR companies are all about equity, right? You want to make sure like everybody is getting what they need to be on a level playing field within the company. So when we're looking at the allowance programs, we have there's can be a big gap in the mileage, right? You could have one employee who's getting paid the same as somebody else, and they're driving 200 miles a month, and the other employee is doing like 300 miles. 100 miles of expenses is a decent amount, whether that be like through gas, wear and tear on the vehicle. Like you mentioned, like it's wasteful, but it is just unfair. And so for companies who really want to make sure their employees get the best benefits of what they got, to continue to have good employee retention and things like that, it's important to take a look at these other programs that we'll talk about shortly, in the sense of this equity, to make sure that your employees are getting paid fairly between them. Right,
yeah, that makes sense to me. So when you have a flat rate allowance of whatever it is, $600 per month, that means very different things to people who have very different mileages. And while the average driver in the US is doing about 12,000 miles a year, there can be huge ranges, from 5,000 all the way up to 50,000. If somebody driving 5,000 miles per year and somebody driving 50,000 miles per year are each getting $600 a month, one person is taking some extra home and the other person is barely getting their most minimal costs covered. So I can see how that's very unfair to employees, but that's not the only way in which it's unfair to employees, is it?
For sure.
I think there are also, differences in regional costs, not just in mileage that drivers do, but also in costs they incur from living and working in different regions across the states.
Yeah, we see that often here at Cardata, where you have companies that are national companies, right? You're working coast to coast, whether that be from California down to Texas, over and up into New York, right? And as we know, the costs vary a lot. We're talking dollars of difference between gallons expensed at certain stations. We're talking differences in insurance. Tends to be quite a bit more expensive to insure a vehicle that's in an urban environment over a rural environment. So these geographical expenses play a big part in this unfairness and equity that we just chatted about. It's not just the mileage, it's about where the employees are, what they're doing, what they're driving, and things of that nature.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, like you said, a gallon of gas last year on the Gulf Coast was often in the threes, whereas in California, it was common to pay $5 and more per gallon of gas, and that has obviously I'm exaggerating a bit, but it's almost twice the price, and gas is one of the main expenses that employees are incurring when driving their personal vehicles for work. So I can see how that would lead to a decent amount of inequity, as you say. And lastly, kind of on this point, there's also the issue of different vehicle types, isn't there, for different employee pools, because we don't only serve sales drivers, we have merchandisers, field techs, and other roles in our programs too, and working for our customers driving for work. I'd expect that these people aren't all driving the same kind of car.
You kind of hit it right on the head there. There's a lot of difference and vehicle variances that we see across the board. We work with med companies who have sales employees, carrying just a small amount of product on the road from site to site, all the way up to companies who have like construction companies or a lot of maintenance vehicles where trucks or vans are the necessity for the job. And as we know, that's a big difference. You know, a small little sedan with a 4-cylinder engine is going to be quite a bit more economical than a Ford F-150 with a V6 or a V8. Like a larger engine takes more gas, kind of all those expenses that add up. Also with insurance, vehicle insurance will probably go up depending on different vehicles, different vehicle classes, model type, things like that. So the vehicle is kind of that third on the tree there of the big expenses that like are unfair between employees.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, if you need an F-150 to do your job, but you're getting the same car allowance as your colleague in the city with a Corolla, yeah, you're not going to be reimbursed fairly, and then you know the consequence of all these layers of inequity is unhappy employees, basically employees that are getting treated equally but not equitably.
Yes.
And you know, an equal reimbursement does not entail a profitable program for your company or for your employees. And so it sounds like there are a ton of problems with these flat rate taxable allowances. So, I mean, simple question, isn't there a better way? Like, hasn't somebody realized this and figured this out?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And luckily, it's the people who created these, these taxation systems. So the IRS has created programs to help enable businesses. I don't want to say to get around, but just to be compliant so that these reimbursements can be paid out fairly. You know, it's a business expense. There's lots of business expenses that can be a business expense for the reason of a tax break. And employee reimbursement should certainly be in there. So the IRS has actually created 3 main programs that I want to discuss today, and I think are very important. First one's going to be CPM, which is a nice and simple acronym, nice and simple program too. Pretty basic, is just a cents per mile program. You know, collecting the miles and seeing how things are going there, and just making sure that you're tracking that, and then you pay out the per mile rate, which works really well for companies who have drivers who are only driving like a little bit here and there. The rate for 2024 is currently 67 cents a mile, which is good. But the one drawback with it is sometimes, you know, if you have a driver that's driving a lot, you're paying them a lot of money to drive, because that 67 cents covers a lot of fees, which is great for somebody who just needs to do a small run. But if they're doing a lot of mileage, that's going to add up, and you're paying your drivers a lot of money at that point. So that's the first program. Second one that we step into is very applicable to actually what we're talking about today with the allowances. And that would be the TFCA, so the tax-free car allowance, or section 463 of the IRS tax book. And so this takes a look at, you know, paying out that allowance, but then paying it out in a way and tracking it in a way that the IRS likes, that makes them happy, so they can see where the expenses are going, the reason why this is being paid out. So there's a couple things that we need to track on that I want to get to later. But that's kind of the main thing with 463 or TFCA. Last one that is quite popular and we find works well for a lot of businesses, especially with drivers who are high mileage, you know, driving a couple thousand miles a year, and then with a good chunk of drivers using personal vehicles, is what's called a favor program. So it's a fixed and variable rate program. So this gets built out with, you know, a fixed rate based on the car, as we just talked about. So you can like select between different employees. If somebody's using a truck, you know, they're going to be getting that fixed rate for the truck instead of just a sedan, and vice versa for the sedan as well. And then you pay a variable rate on top of that. So that kind of relates back to that cents per mile. Now with the favor program, the variable rate's normally less than the cents per mile program because you already have that fixed rate coming out. But one of the main key things to note about a favor program, which a lot of employees like and a lot of companies like, is the fact that it's the only program where you can actually pay over, you know, that cents per mile rate. By creating these rich vehicle profiles, which again I want to get to a bit later here, you're able to pay a good chunk to your employees and make them like really happy. So they feel good about using their vehicle, they feel good about coming to work, and they feel like they're being properly reimbursed.
Wow, so there's a lot there actually. It sounds like you're talking about 3 different vehicle reimbursement programs that are an alternative to these taxable allowances. Mm-hmm. And you talked about the IRS standard rate program, where you just pay an employee who drives 1 mile, 67 cents per mile. Mm-hmm. You talked about the 463 publication that allows you to pay an accountable allowance, and how by just implementing some good accounting practices for your employees' business driving, you can actually take that same allowance, that same $600 allowance, and make it tax-free. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, given that those 2 former programs are in some ways limited by the 67 cent ceiling for tax-free car allowance payments, insofar as those programs are limited, yet there is also this favor program that allows you to go above and beyond the IRS standard rate if you so choose, mm-hmm. and to pay your employees a very rich program. I think it's important to note that for all these programs you can, and we'll get into vehicle profiles in a moment, but for all these different programs you can assign to your employees a car worth as much as $62,000. This rate is this figure rather is updated every year, but this year it's $62,000, and you can base your reimbursements on a car that costs that much, which in the United States today can get you pretty much any luxury sedan you like. Mm-hmm. You can get a whole number of different Mercedes and Audis and BMWs for absolutely for $62,000. So there's ways to make these programs really generous, and first of all, before you even think about making these programs great benefits for your employees, there's also just the recovery, and this is really important to drive home, the recovery on each one of these programs of that 30 or 38% tax waste that we were discussing earlier. Mm-hmm. With just some simple accounting practices, and by selecting one or several of these tax programs, you're immediately recapturing hundreds of dollars per month, mm-hmm. for every employee. This can translate for some of our customers to an immediate savings of hundreds of thousands, or even over $1 million per year. Yep. In total program saved, and whether you return that money in the form of reimbursements to your employees, or you keep that money for different business objectives that you might have within your company, whatever you do with the money, it's better saved and put back in employee pockets and company coffers rather than needlessly handed over to the tax man. So, yep. With all that in mind, it's also important to point out that that these programs are also great at rectifying some of the inequities that we were just discussing. So, mm-hmm. There's an opportunity with these programs not only to save tax waste, but also to make this a better benefit style program for your employees, insofar as we can correct for some of those regional differences, mileage bands, and vehicle types. So if you wouldn't mind to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think one important thing to note, as we just previously discussed with the favor program, right? You build out different vehicle profiles. So that's one of the big things for that. The nice thing is as well is with these programs, you don't have to run just one program for the company. You can run a cents per mile program. You can run, a TFCA program, and you can run a favor program if you wanted to take it home with the big 3, But it allows for this flexibility, and to create these vehicle profiles. We see companies, as you stated, up to the $62,000 for a profile. There are companies who say, our top sales employees maybe, or we really value this team and we want to make sure they're getting paid a lot. And so that's where you can pay that out. And then, like you mentioned too, the business can also recoup some of those tax savings, which tends to just be a win-win for everybody. The employee will most likely still get paid what they're getting paid before, because they're saving on the taxes now. And then the company will also be able to retain some of that money, which again can hopefully go into business expenses or employee retention or other programs to benefit the overall vehicle program.
You're at least taking your 7.65% payroll tax back as the company. And you're not obliged to run any specific kind of reimbursement program. You have incredible flexibility with these things. It's important that you take that first step and you make the program immediately 30%, 38% more efficient by recapturing that tax waste and distributing it throughout your company and throughout your programs as you see fit, essentially. And going back to the three programs, as you said earlier, these three programs were all designed by the IRS. And the way that you're able to run all of these, there's different compliance measures and different standards for each program.
Yep.
But one thing that they all have in common is they have accountability requirements. So there are certain things that you need to do with every kind of program that you might run in order for them to be minimally accountable and therefore considered tax deductible and tax-free driving programs by the IRS. So what is that minimum standard, and what do you need to do on every single one of these programs that you discussed in order to make it cool with the IRS?
The more we go up in programs, for instance, like a favored program, which tends to be, no pun intended, but favored by a lot of companies, is a big thing, but that gets more complex. So obviously Cardata, as a VRP, can help with all these down the road. But let's look at what you need. So for CPM, main thing is your mileage tracked, right? To show, okay, what's the mileage? You're going to need the odometer reading at the start, the odometer reading at the end, the business, purpose of the business trip, the date, and then the mileage tracked for that trip. So those are really like some of the base numbers. And so in publication 463, right, they have a sheet where you can break it down and look over it. But I mean, these are older programs, and today, it doesn't make sense to do everything on paper. We don't do spreadsheets on paper anymore. We use computers and Excel for things like that. So there's certainly other ways to track it, which I want to get into more in a bit. But taking a look at what you need to track, those are the main things you really need to track. And then for a favored program, there's some other tracking things. One of the big requirements with favored program, and again, a favored program is not going to work for all companies. There's going to be companies that just want a CPM or a tax-free car allowance, and that's totally cool. Because with a favored program, you need to have at least 5 drivers on the program, and they need to be driving over 5,000 miles a year. So it's a really great program for companies who have a good amount of drivers who are driving a lot. For companies who have, just a handful of drivers who maybe, again, doing some bank runs, have to do a couple errands here and there, it might not make as much sense. So it really does come down to what does our company need to do, how many drivers do we have, and then look at some of these things. But those are some of the main, to kind of answer your question, that those are the main tracking points for what you need for those different programs.
There's this base layer across all programs, which is just that you're recording the mileage that you're doing. And you said something really interesting there, which is that it's not just your odometer readings, the mileage, and the destination address of the trip, but also the business purpose of the trip. So there's this extra sort of longhand data point that you need to record with every trip, which is like, why did you go there? Because these need to be obviously legitimate business expenses. And given that employees are bringing their personal vehicles to work, although note that this does apply to fleet vehicles as well in some ways, given that they're bringing their personal vehicles to work, it will be important to differentiate between business and personal mileage. So part of these log sheets that you're describing is to differentiate between business and personal mileage. Commuting in almost all cases is not tax deductible, and then personal trips, even during business hours, are not necessarily tax deductible. So the business purpose of the trip is important, and then all these other data points that you collect as well. And as you pointed out, the old way of doing this, or the entry level way of doing this, is by recording all this information that we've described on a mileage log, and we've even made an Excel spreadsheet version of this, which I'll put in the show notes. But this is kind of the prior generation of mileage tracking and logging. But before we get into the new ways, can you tell me, like, how complicated is it to run one of these programs in-house and to meet these minimal accounting standards by tracking mileage? Like, what is the burden of an in-house attempt at mileage logging or mileage tracking?
The simple answer is these programs have been set up for companies to run, okay? So there's no like specialization that you need. It can be done in-house. Now, part of the trick with it being done in-house is then obviously now you're taking time. Although you're saving on taxes, you're now taking up more time for your finance team or your HR team to track this mileage. One of the other big things is, again, going back to writing it down on paper and doing this manual method, is sometimes things can get missed. There's human error, right? Think about probably you and me growing up, we family road trips, right? You use like a paper map, and you have to trace it out, or you figure out how to get there, and your dad's getting you in trouble because you took a wrong turn somewhere or something. Where now we have like Google Maps and GPSs and such that are automated to help reduce that human error. And so that's another part of, again, it can be done in-house, but like reducing that human error where possible is a good idea for when it comes around to tax season or compliance or audits or things like that. Just having like an app to track it, or use technology that we have, and that will help get rid of some of these human errors.
The first time I would use Google Maps with my family when I was younger, we would print off the directions from Google Maps. So you would get the directions, you would print them off, and then somebody would be trying to navigate while the other person drove. And you could pretty much certify that you would make one wrong turn per trip minimum. Yeah. There is no way you were getting there on a long road trip without making at least one mistake. And the same principle applies to tracking mileage for work. When you're writing things down on a piece of paper, there's just a lot of opportunity for human error, and probably, all that said, the more important issue is the time that you're spending to do that, right? The time that it takes to record every one of these trips, given that you have to put odometer readings, addresses, and the business purpose of every trip. So it's a hassle for the drivers, essentially.
Yeah, it's a hassle for both.
Yes, right? And for the administrators is, I think, what you're going to say. Yeah. Because you did mention the HR team. So we've talked a bunch about mileage tracking, but there's other stuff going on in the vehicle reimbursement program, isn't there? That the HR team or the finance team is doing. Could you talk about that and how much of a hassle that really is? The back of house initiatives as well. Mm-hmm. Once it's in-house, rather. Once the program is an in-house program.
Yeah. So with the in-house program, right, you're going to have your team doing things that can move the business forward. You don't want your finance team to be spending, one day a week or a month simply just trying to gather reports and put it together. And so not only is there complications of it, it just takes extra time. And so in, using a VRP or a platform can really help aggregate everything and put it together. The same way that you'll do email tracking, the same way that you'll do maybe other tracking, LinkedIn tracking, things like that. We don't write everything down nowadays. And so why treat your vehicle program in the same way? It just doesn't make sense.
Inefficiencies with manual recording when you're making these car allowances tax-free of both the mileage logs and also the back end, the collating of these mileage logs, preparing for taxes, making sure your ducks are in a row, and also issuing reimbursement payments. That's like another thing that somebody has to do. And I'd imagine, and I know this to be the case from talking with some of our customers, that it's actually not a lot of fun to be chasing mileage logs around as an HR manager, to be chasing mileage logs around at the end of every month or every quarter. So how do we fix this? I mean, we've kind of been alluding to it, but like how do we get away from manual logging, manual program design, and manual reimbursement payment?
There's something beautiful, and I got it right here in my pocket, actually.
Show me.
Cell phone,
Nice.
right? Most of your employees are going to have this. Most of your employees, are going to be able to utilize it, whether it's a personal phone or even if it's a business phone. We all have this awesome technology in our pocket, or the majority of us do. And so we might as well utilize it. And so here at Cardata, what we specialize in is we have our application side, which helps track the mileage, which is all the background work, where you're going, what the trip was for. And then that also, as we talked about, because it's not just the employee that it takes up time for, it takes up time for the back team, so the HR team, the finance team. And so you get this data from the application, and then that runs back to administration, which then just simplifies the whole thing. Again, going back to like Google Maps, it's just simply typing something in and setting that address instead of having to file through these papers. We live in a digital era. We live in a time where, tech is super readily available.
Just as in the past, we had tax programs being run on paper in the back office and mileage logs in every driver's glove box. Now we have software programs from mileage apps on drivers' phones to dashboards, business intelligence tools, direct deposit payment processors, etc., on the administrator's computer. So we're really just bringing the same good accounting principles into what is essentially accounting software, and saving everybody a whole lot of time and a whole lot of hassle in the process, both drivers and admins, and, like you mentioned, reducing your risk of erroneous recordings, payments, etc. You mentioned that there are these 3 kinds of vehicle reimbursement programs: cents per mile, tax-free car allowance, or 463 accountable car allowance. Those are synonyms. And then lastly, favor. So, what is the ideal program for my company, my hypothetical company, and how do I pick?
First of all, you need to sit down with your team, and we see it's never really in the same department. Some companies might have in their finance department, some might have in HR. Wherever your current vehicle program lies, or whoever currently takes care of reimbursement programs, sit down with your team and say, okay, what do our drivers do on a daily basis? How many do we have? How many miles are they putting on their cars? And really start at that fundamental thing. Because as we talked about earlier, these programs differ depending on what the employees are doing. And so, taking a look at that, then from there you go, okay, we have a bunch of sales employees who are driving 6,000 miles a year, like 30 sales employees that drive 6,000 miles. Well, from what we know, or discussing with our vendor, is that a favor program, this would be applicable for that. And then we have 10 employees who are higher ups, VPs, directors, and they just do a bit of driving but need to be reimbursed for it. Driving to the airport for business trips, or going to the bank to cash a check, things like this. That would probably be a CPM program, because that's what makes sense. And so there's a section of it that is going to be done in-house, where you need to sit down and decide, because you know your company better than anybody outside is going to know your company. So you need to figure out, first of all, what are our needs, what are the pain points that we have, and where can we go from there. And then once you've done that, it's really good to talk to your vendor, or search around to find a company that's able to work with you, understand where your needs are coming from, and then figure out a way to best suit those needs and implement a solid vehicle program.
Okay, got it. And it, one kind of implication of what you're saying, which I think is probably pretty nice, is that you actually you don't have to pick just one. You can run some or all of these programs in tandem within your company, which sort of alleviates the pressure of making a big decision. And it sounds like you want to talk a little bit about how do you find somebody to help support these programs? You were starting to talk about vendor selection and stuff like that. So we've identified the way to get rid of the tax on your car allowance. It's by running one of these tax programs. We've identified the subsequent issue, which is it actually takes a lot of time and effort and is error prone when you do these in-house. So let's say you're thinking now you want to find an outsourced vendor in order to have a partner to run your program with you. How do you start doing that, and what are the kinds of things that you want to start looking for?
And I'm going to use a lot of car analogies, right? We work in the car industry. I'm a car guy myself, and so just kind of makes sense, and hopefully people, our viewers, can relate as well. Let's say you're searching for a car. You're not going to, first of all, you're going to start to do your research. Like I said, you're going to say, what are my needs? What do I need the vehicle for? Do I need it to just pick up the kids from soccer? How many kids do I have to start with? Do I need a minivan? Where do we go from there? So first of all is to find those needs. And then the other thing that's important is to shop around. Not all companies are going to offer exactly the same plan. One thing that we like to talk about, though, is that these programs, as we've talked about, are set up from the IRS. So here at Cardata, like, we're a steward of these programs. You won't find much change between the program because it has to be built the way it is. But there's a lot of other things that surround that. So when searching around looking for, a good customer support team, customer service team for the HR and finance background, and then the support team for the drivers themselves. Looking for a company that can walk you through and again help set up these programs, as we talked about earlier. The same way that you'd go to a dealership and talk to the sales employee about what you're looking for in the car, you'd hope that they can point you in the right direction and talk you through why this is applicable and why you should go this route. So those are really some of the main key points, I would say. Don't be afraid to shop around, understand what you need, and then look for somebody who's willing to help you reach your goals within that sector.
Yeah, those sound like really good steps. It starts with knowing what you want and need, and then not settling once you go out there and looking for somebody who's going to really help you and meet those needs. And that's interesting what you say about Cardata being, a steward of these IRS programs. That's certainly true in a sense. It might be, and we'll get to red flags later, but it might be a red flag if somebody's offering programs that seem wildly different from the other stuff that you're seeing in market, because there should be this standardization within the different rule sets that apply to these different programs. We've talked about some of the compliance measures throughout our discussion today, and you obviously want to make sure that the program is as visibly compliant as you can see, and that's something to look out for. But then, as you mentioned, there are these superstructural elements that are really what you're shopping for in a vendor. And one of the things that you underscored was customer service. And there could be different aspects to this. There could be customer service, there could be customer success, depending on how you're looking at these things. So could you begin to describe for us, what does good customer service look like in these programs, and why it's so essential for running a proper vehicle reimbursement program?
For sure. I'd say there's two main things you want, right? We have customer service, as a lot of companies have, and then the other one would be that customer success. And so I think that's a big one in this space. Again, it goes with the fact of you don't want to just be set up and then sent on your way with a program. There's going to be complications, and there you should have somebody there by your side to help you work through it. The same way, again, using car analogies, you could do the brakes on your car by yourself, but the mechanic knows really well what they're doing, and they can help either walk you through or continue to have them done properly. So this is certainly important when it comes to the customer success team, is finding somebody who is well versed in what they have, and then also it's important if you have drivers, there's your operating business hours, but some drivers might be outside of those. And so to find a customer service team that can fulfill the hours that your drivers are doing. So it might not be 24/7. You probably don't have people driving in the AM, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. But to make sure that the problems that arise can be dealt with quickly, whether that be same day, next day, hopefully not really past next day. You want that answer quickly. So those would be the two things that I'd really talk about when looking for a customer success team.
Yeah, it's like so critical because in case it's not already apparent to our listeners and viewers, these programs are a little bit complex. There's a few moving pieces here, and you want to make sure that you have the team at your back to allow you to do these programs properly. And that's not to say that you shouldn't be an expert yourself. In fact, one of the other things that you want to look for in customer service and customer success, the vendor actually teaching you the ins and outs of your program and helping you run it, because while getting an outsourced partner while it discovers a lot of efficiencies in terms of time, it doesn't mean that the program's no longer yours. It's still your favor program or your accountable allowance. And you want somebody who's going to upskill you until you can take accountability for your own program. And so you can fix things yourself and know things yourself. So while you may not be changing your brake pads, you can change the oil, for example, or you can put some new washer fluid in. And then when it comes to something really complex, you leave it to the pros and you rely on them. Because as we have all learned, or as many of us have learned the hard way, when you change the brake pads yourself, you end up with a lot of squeaks and stop signs.
It's important, again, to remember that team is there to support you. They shouldn't just send you on your way. If you buy a horse, hopefully you don't just hop on it right away. You're gonna need some lessons to figure out how that thing works. And if you're ever in a sticky situation, it's good to have somebody who's knowledgeable about whatever it is you're working with. So I think that's a really good point, and I like that section of coming back there.
Okay, so my next question is more relating to the actual software. So you found the perfect customer service team for you. You really trust the vendor or the partner to have your back and teach you what you need to know. What are some things that are really thrilling though when people do bring in these mileage tracking apps and these vehicle reimbursement dashboards, when they bring in the driver and the admin software? What's really exciting to people, and how is it making driver and admin lives easier?
That idea of like automated tracking, that's really like the big key there, is just to have that done automatically. Saves time for the salesperson's day. Like I've worked a job where I've had to write down the miles in the past, do mileage and all my own expense tracking. That's tedious, and sometimes it'll fall outside of your business hours. So I think the biggest employee benefit is going to be that ease of mind of the tracking section. For the employer side, as we talked about as well earlier, would be that kind of ease of mind of they don't need to collect all the receipts. It's going to be in a dashboard on a computer, and you'll be able to run through and check, which allows you to also find errors more easily because all your data is in one section. So those are kind of the two main pieces I would say that you'll find beneficial. Now, it is important to work with a vendor and a team as well who's going to train and set you up with their software, right? If you have a Microsoft, a Windows user, and you put them on a Mac right away, it's going to be weird. They're like, why do I have to close the tab on the other side of the screen, right? And so there's little differences like that. So it's important to make sure that although there's a lot of benefits, that your team is well instructed on how to work through this program to make the change as painless as possible.
You're looking for good customer service and you're looking for good software, but you're also looking for the intersection of the two. There are these software tools that really help drivers and admins do their job. They make it a lot easier, but there are furthermore synergies that you want to look for between the software and the customer service, customer success teams. You want to be not only looking for great software and great people, but the two together. So these are some of the good things we've been looking for in vehicle reimbursement vendors, but what are some of the bad things? What are the red flags that you definitely don't want to see during your buying process?
Well, it's going to be the opposite of a good chunk of the green flags, right? That just kind of makes sense. one of the main things, and I think this goes for any time you're buying something, is when there's a deal that's too good to be true. And especially in this software and sales sector, there's a lot of times where when they just want your business, they're just going to undersell you or, try and drop the price. Now, it's good to be mindful of that, to say, okay, why is it so much cheaper? Am I really getting a deal here, or am I just going to be in trouble down the road? So that's important thing to look at. The other thing I would say is just if you're buying a car, right? You're going to have some knowledge of what you're looking for and have a good understanding of what you're going to get. Even like a coffee, you know what you're going to get in your coffee. So it's good to have an idea of these things ahead of time so you can come in with some knowledge and not just get blindsided by somebody who just wants to sell you the program. So I think that's really important. And then the other one would be finding a vendor that knows what they're talking about, right? The same way that you don't want to, if you go to the barista when you're getting your coffee done and they're like, how do I use the machine? That's probably a bit of a red flag. So to work with a company and a sector where they know what they're doing, they understand the questions you're asking, and then they can point you and connect with you in a way that's positive. So I would say that's the green flag of it. So stay away from a sales team or a company that really doesn't seem like they have their stuff together.
I think those last two things do go together. You want, first of all, a sales team that's clearly demonstrating a capacious knowledge of the thing that they're selling you. And the way you'll be able to tell that that's happening is that you'll be able to, in some senses, simply describe what you're buying. Because while a vehicle reimbursement program is a complicated thing, you should still, after going through the process of evaluating a vendor or a partner, you should still be able to explain in simple terms what this thing actually is that you're buying, in the same way that you would be able to explain what it is and what it does when you're buying a wrench or a car or a coffee, like you said. You know what those things do, and you want to know what a VRP does too. Let's say you found a vendor that you like. Let's say you found somebody who has good software, good service, and none of the red flags. Yet still, your people are going to be a little bit nervous about change. They're going to be nervous about going from this simple, old-fashioned, yet taxable system that they know to something new. Any change, especially when it's sizable and relating to your work life, is going to come with a bit of anxiety. So can you talk a little bit about change and how you'd expect the right vendor to help with change management?
Yeah, this is really where that customer service comes in, and especially the customer success, working with the team that's going to implement this. You want to have a company that's going to walk through with you with the process. You want to make sure that it's going to be a multi-stage thing. So often here at Cardata, we do what's called a discovery call, and that's kind of our first one, where we simply just want to sit down with you. We're not going to work to get the program going right away. We want to hear what you're doing with your company, what you're looking for, and then going from there. So change is scary, whether it's in business or other things. It always has some sort of fear around it because there's that unknown. And so it's very important for the customer success in this sector to really walk through and to, train, make sure that the employees are trained on the software, make sure that the HR, finance team are trained on the back end of the software, and to make sure that everybody's feeling comfortable as the change occurs. So that's really important, and I think a big part of why not only it's tech sales, but there's all that customer service sales, which is pretty much just as important as if the app works properly, and I think can be overlooked sometimes.
Yeah, got it. So there's a big onus on the vendor to provide education during the whole process and roadmaps for success. And lastly, and to sort of bring some of this stuff together, because Cardata obviously offers a version of these programs. What is Cardata's methodology around VRP implementation, management, and if you could explain why we call ourselves the fully managed vehicle reimbursement partner, I think that would be interesting for our listeners.
There's quite a few companies, I think, would go about the, fully managed, I think one thing that, in a Cardata sense, as you're asking, is that all of our stuff is done in-house, whether it be customer service, customer success, the engineering side of the application. They're all in-house things. We don't outsource these things, which works well, because then when you need answers, when your team is running their program and they need to connect, you don't have to jump through like 20 hoops to get to the person you're looking for. So that's an important part to start with there. All of our team, right from the moment that we start that discovery call in sales to like signing the contract to even maybe ending the contract at some point, you're going to have somebody walking through that whole time. And so that's really where the fully managed thing comes from. And just to have that team with you, so you're not lost, you're not trying to wander on your own, figure stuff out. That's really where that fully managed comes from.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, as soon as you get to Cardata, and for however long you're with Cardata, you have somebody to help you every step in the way, and at every touch point, from the simplest customer service call to the most complex engineering question. There is somebody literally at Cardata, one of our colleagues in the office, who is able to assist you with that. And I think that's, because of all the complexities that we've identified in transitioning from these simple and archaic taxable allowances and coming onto a vehicle reimbursement program, because of all these complexities, it's really important to have that fully managed aspect when you are selecting a vendor. So that concludes my questions for you, and I'd like to just take a moment to recapitulate for our audience what we've discussed, because this was a bit of a long and complicated discussion. We started off by discussing taxable allowances, which are the simplest way in which you can empower an employee to drive their personal vehicle for work. So you need somebody to bring their own car and drive it on behalf of your business. A car allowance is the simplest way to reimburse them for this. And companies for a long time have been giving flat rate car allowances. The problem with these is that without any accounting practices, they are taxable. And you are losing up to 38%. Even it's actually possible to lose more than 38% of your car allowance to taxes. That puts a huge dent in the average car allowance of $600 or $800, whatever it might be. There is no reason and there is no pleasure in losing 38% of your car allowance to taxes. However, the IRS, as well as companies, have recognized this and provided tax programs for businesses to run vehicle reimbursements and issue these car allowances or these reimbursements, which is to say the same thing, tax-free for personal vehicle business use. So the programs are cents per mile, 463 accountable allowance, and favor. And in any of these programs, you are able to issue that same allowance, but you immediately recapture the tax waste. There are also other equities that these programs discover insofar as you're accounting for regional differences in program design, you're accounting for different mileage bands, and you are lastly accounting for different vehicle types, among other benefits of bringing on these programs besides just the recapture of tax waste. And then we moved into, the differences between in-house manual processes to run these vehicle reimbursement programs and the benefits that you get when you bring on an outsourced provider of vehicle reimbursement software. And then lastly, to kind of wrap up our discussion, we talked about some of the things that you should be looking for when you're looking for that vendor to help you run and manage your new tax-free vehicle reimbursement program. So with that, Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about this stuff with me today. And that'll conclude our discussion.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, Torben.
Cheers.
Cheers.